The current crisis reminds us that this nation is actually a federation where power and responsibilities are not centralised. Some states have closed their borders, tightening restrictions and going alone, while others have not. However, even before the crisis, there was actually a desperate need for reform. If we go back to 1901, Federation saw certain powers vested in the Commonwealth, national defence, external affairs, etc. Everything else belonged to the states. However, as a result of World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, the Commonwealth intervened for national survival. Sound familiar? And the Federation today is far removed from what the Founding Fathers intended. Totally confused responsibilities. I shouldn't smile. Duplication and overlap are the order of the day. Prior to this crisis, the bushfires, for example, Australians were confused and fed up with the buck shifting and buck passing. State and territory First Ministers usually act and sound like mendicantes, even at the best of times, because they actually are. They constantly endure, and I've been there, the federal government weighing in on matters that in 1901 weren't anything to do with them. Fundamentally, of course, as in many things in life, the problem is money, or more precisely, the vertical fiscal imbalance that sees Canberra collect all the loot, talk loudly about delivery while the states actually do all the heavy lifting, the actual work. Then there is that other Federation acronym, horizontal fiscal equalisation. Are you following me? A socialist notion. It means that states like New South Wales and Victoria have subsidised everyone else for 100 years. Then just when WA came into some real money, it got taken off them. HFE is a fig leaf for state and territory governments that won't perform. Great to be a premier when you have fewer real responsibilities and less control over outcomes. Just blame Canberra. Why be a low tax state? Why wear political pain and open up your state's gas fields or mineral resources? Let's fix Federation to reduce waste and duplication, restore trust in the system, empower smart people in other places other than Canberra to step up and truly lead, and let's strip away the fig leaf by creating competitive federalism where states and territories must stand up and be counted. So what do you think, Catherine? Have I got it wrong, or is there some things we should be actually fixing at the moment?
Mate, we're going to sound like an ABC version of the drum here. I'm in violent agreement with you. I think the Federation, the
Why
initial
outrageous? I'm going to change my mind. It's all working.
Yeah, that's right. No, I couldn't agree more. You know, there were supposed to be highly specific, enumerated powers surrendered by the colonies to create the Commonwealth. And as you said, national crises, and don't forget the engineers case way back in 1920, changed things enormously in the way, the prism through which the High Court viewed the Constitution. And I think you're right. That uniform tax case, albeit out of World War II, made the states into beggars, and they've got lazy on it. It's allowed them to shift blame when they are fundamentally responsible for service delivery. And I think our civic liberties and the diversity of our thought and innovation is made better by having diversity amongst the states. And I know we've got a Western Australia and a couple of Queenslanders here who have always tended to run their own race. And I think that's a great strength of Australia if we allow it to happen. I'll close on this to give the other guys a go, but I think we should here's what I'd do after this. After going through this mess we've been through now for 4 months, if you throw the fires in, I would kill this darn Royal Commission into the bushfires. Forget it. That's a moving target. Let's sit down at the end of this and have another constitutional convention and have a serious look at what our national disaster plans are, who owns what. And I tell you what I'd do. I'd re-empower the states to do hazard reduction and get rid of state councils out of that space entirely. I'll leave it for Gemma and Sarah to have a shot now, but I strongly agree with you. I think we've polluted it, polluted the interpretation of our Constitution.
Catherine. Yeah, well, thanks, Catherine. What do you think, Sarah? Am I on the right track, or are we on the right track? And if we are, how do we actually go about fixing some of these things?
Well, I think you're definitely on the right track, Campbell, in terms of the voter frustration with the assigning blame. I live in New South Wales, and people all around the country would have seen that we had this crazy situation last Sunday evening where the Prime Minister came out and, said certain things, not to belabour the point, but schools was at the heart of that. He said it's in best interest that parents send their children to school tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Monday morning. The New South Wales Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, came out and completely contradicted that information. The end result, a lot of confused people, but also a lot of frustrated people, because there was a view, quite rightfully, that we are in the midst of a national crisis, well, an international crisis, but at a federal and state level. We expect our leaders to have our best interests and to be showing leadership. And even if behind the scenes, and Campbell, I'm sure you've seen plenty of this in your time in Parliament, where everyone might be tense and there might be strongly held disagreements, but then you get in front of the cameras, you speak to the voters via the media, and you show some sort of consensus. And if you can't agree, you at least have found some common ground that you're able to communicate and let your constituents know that they're being heard. What we've seen this past week is just a lot of people blaming each other. And then, of course, there was this ridiculous, dangerous situation where a cruise ship let people that had been infected with coronavirus out into the community. And unfortunately, no one's really taken the blame for that, because I think it's exactly to your point that they've all been hiding behind this, oh, that's federal, that's state. It's not good enough. It's got to somehow be clearly delineated. I like Catherine's idea of perhaps, making that part of an inquiry at the end of this.
Well, Sarah, thanks for that. And I think that maybe Gemma now wants to comment in terms of I was throwing you a bit of a line there about the way that, just from a financial perspective, New South Wales and Victoria undoubtedly, bolstered the Commonwealth for years, forever, for 100 years, and then WA was doing well during the mining boom, but then it all got
stole all our money.
It does. It gets taken out. So the GST sort of receipts to WA went through the floor. So, how can this actually be fixed? I think that's the important thing. I mean, I have a view. It's got to be a political solution by politicians, not with bureaucrats, as some former prime ministers have tried to achieve.
Do you think that?
Yeah.
Interesting, Cam. I mean, do you think that there is any hope of a political fix by politicians? I don't know. I don't mean to be. I'm not being trite about that or sarcastic about it. I think there are definite flaws, as you've identified, but perhaps nowhere near as drastic as blowing the joint up. I know over here the whole GST situation really rammed it home for West Australians in relation to that, and that got fixed, and it got fixed before the election because it was a voter issue over here. But if you talk about energy, for example, I mean, there's no impetus for Victoria to become self-sufficient. We are over here in the West very, very well insulated, if you like, where the energy reliability issue is concerned. We're sort of all warm our popcorn up and watch you guys fight over how you're going to keep the lights on. But that's a great example of how there is no driver for a state like Victoria to invest in developing its natural resources when it knows it's going to be propped up by other states. So, I mean,
I think we've got to get back. I think we've got to get back to the point on this, though, too. I think this issue that was raised a few weeks ago about the way the aliens' power is interpreted, we need to start getting serious about who we appoint to the High Court as the ultimate court interpreting this Constitution. And I think we need to get back to the fundamentals. And I interpreted, Campbell, you're making a states' rights case, and I'm supportive of that. I think it was the foundational compact, and we've seen it breached this week. No state, as I understand it, has any constitutional authority to close its border under Section 92. That point doesn't seem to have been taken, and I can understand why in the current panic it hasn't. Likewise, calling out the Defence Forces the states agreed under Section 114 never to raise their own military forces. That was a monopoly of the Commonwealth. But if we're going to come out of this as a sane, safe Westminster democracy on the other side, we need to start really enforcing some of the written text of the Constitution. We've got soldiers in hotel foyers tonight. I'll bet you they don't know what their powers of arrest and rules of engagement are, because this is really unclear what has gone on here. It's all been made up on the run. The Constitution has served us well. I'm for going back and interpreting it correctly.
It has to be. I mean, to take a contrarian view, Catherine, it has to be made up on the run, because where's the playbook? As the Prime Minister rightly said tonight, there are playbooks for floods. There are playbooks for fires.
We called the military out in 1978 after.
Yeah, there is no playbook.
We called the military out after the 1978 Hilton bombing. There's a precedent there. And there's no I's being dotted on this one that I can see.
That's a single event. That's a single event. One bomb, one hotel. Not an ongoing pandemic that is changing by the day and sometimes by the hour. There is no playbook.
Yeah.
One thing we haven't talked about is one thing we haven't talked about. This is a critical point. I mean, post-corona, and it was pre-corona. It's the waste and inefficiency and the duplication. I mean, you know. So I don't know how many bureaucrats in Canberra Education Department. They don't run any schools. The states run the schools. The Commonwealth funds, you know, independent and Catholic school system. I mean, it's that sort of thing. You know, state environment departments, Commonwealth environment departments.
That's right.
You know, if this nation is poorer after this, we need to spend our money more wisely. And a new compact for how our federation works between the Prime Minister and the First Ministers of the states and territories would be a great way to better spend money after this is all settled.